Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Wilson Center. My name is Duncan Wood. I'm the Vice President for Strategy and New Initiatives here at Wilson. We're delighted to have with us today the Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, or ISA, Michael Lodge. Michael has been running the ISA for a number of years now, and of course the ISA has been a critically important organization when we're looking at the management of the oceans in general. And today we're looking specifically at the question of deep-sea mining. For a number of years now at the Wilson Center, we've had ongoing work on critical minerals and the critical mineral supply chain. And seabed mining has become a highly interesting issue with area of study within this issue. And the International Seabed Authority, of course, is responsible for developing the regulatory framework that will govern seabed mining when eventually that happens. Michael, thank you for being with us today at the Wilson Center. We're delighted to have you with us, and I'd like to begin just by asking you to give us an overview of the International Seabed Authority, a very brief history of that, what the ISA does today, and what is the state of the art in terms of the conversation about the regulatory framework, a global framework that will ultimately govern seabed mining. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Duncan. It's good to be here. So the International Seabed Authority is an international organization. We currently have 169 member states, so almost universal participation. We were established by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is the constitution for the oceans, it's often called, which entered into force in 1994, which is when ISA also opened its doors for business. So we will have been going for 30 years next year. Our responsibility is over the seabed beyond the national jurisdiction of states, so that means beyond the outer limit of the continental shelf. It's a very large part of the ocean. It still covers around 50% of the global ocean. And we have a responsibility, as you say, first to regulate all activities relating to marine minerals, that is exploration and eventually exploitation. But actually we also have a very broad mandate over other things as well, in particular a broad mandate for marine science in the deep sea and for capacity building, because many of our members are developing countries, so we have a very important role in building capacity of developing countries to enable them to have access to deep sea science. In the 30 years that we've been in operation, we have applied what is often called the evolutionary approach, which means that we started off very slowly, first to put in place a regulatory regime to govern exploration, which also reflects a very precautionary approach. At the forefront of our concern is protection of the marine environment, and to ensure that we proceed in a very well-informed, scientifically driven way. And that exploration framework has developed to the point where we have at the moment around 30 exploration projects active around the world, on the basis of a globally applicable legal regime. And thanks to that exploration work that has taken place, we have a tremendous amount of data, very good understanding of the global distribution of marine minerals, where they occur in commercial quantities, the environment around them, the economics of deep sea mining, technology development, and so on. And so many of those exploration projects are now quite mature in terms of having identified a resource and being in a position to move ahead to develop that resource. So the conversation in ISA at the moment is really around moving to that next step, exploitation, harvesting of marine minerals. And we have been working for a number of years now on setting up the regulations for exploitation. We're reaching the later stages of that process. I'm not going to say the end because there's still some way to go, but certainly the later phases. This work is being done primarily in the Council of the Authority, which is a political body made up of 36 member states. But it's a conversation that is happening with also the participation of all other member states, observer states such as the US, and civil society and other non-governmental representatives. The latest stage that we've reached is that the Council has itself agreed on a roadmap that would finalize the regulations by early in 2025 is the target, and I think that's proceeding quite well. And that would then give us the basis to move ahead to the next stage, if anybody is ready to move ahead to the next stage. But it would provide a level playing field, let's say, that is globally applicable to all 169 member states, and clearly set out the rules, the regulations, the economics of moving ahead to see exploitation of seabed minerals.
Okay, but just to be clear, finishing the regulatory framework and getting agreement, consensus on that, does not mean that seabed mining is going to take place immediately afterwards. That would lead to the possibility of permitting of that. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes. I mean, it doesn't mean that seabed mining would happen the next day or even the next year. It's there's a whole process of permitting, and really that's the discussion around the regulations is what that process should look like and what are the sort of terms and conditions eventually under which exploitation would be permitted.
Fantastic. Now, what have been the major points of contention in the conversation surrounding the regulatory framework up to this point? Because this is a process that has been going on for the best part of 30 years. So what is it that has been delaying the process of getting this done, and what are the still the biggest issues that are out there, Michael?
Well, it's a long process because there is a lot of different elements involved. If we look at the discussions at the moment, we can see that broadly there are discussions around the financial terms. That's obviously an absolutely critical part of the investment decision that would have to be made by the industry. How much they will have to pay to the ISA to recover minerals, whether that is economic, and all that has to be discussed. There is a big discussion around things like monitoring and enforcement and inspection rights. We're dealing with areas beyond national jurisdiction, so that immediately complicates matters because many of these operations would be very far out at sea, so we would have to be able to rely on very rigorous remote monitoring systems using technology, which is all perfectly possible. And then there's obviously a discussion around environmental impacts. The interesting thing is that when it comes to the discussion of environmental impacts, there is a great deal of common ground. Everybody agrees that we need to have the most rigorous environmental standards because it is a global activity, but there should be standards that every country in the world has to abide by and has to apply. And they have to be driven by data, and they have to be driven by science and a very precautionary approach.
Could we drill a little bit deeper on that issue of research and data and the science? Because very often it's said that there isn't data. Very often it's said that we don't know enough yet about seabed mining. but of course there have been studies going on for many, many years. There's a lot of data out there. Number one, can you tell us about the development of that data resource? And secondly, how do we distinguish between good data and bad data?
Yeah, data is fundamental, and science is fundamental to everything we do. As you say, exploration of the seabed started way, way back in the 1970s. In fact, it was one of the reasons why the Law of the Sea Conference was convened, and one of the main elements in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea back in 1982. So exploration work was taking place before ISA even existed. So we have around 30 years of data under the ISA regime, but we also have access to data from before that date. So an enormous amount of data. We have a fundamental principle, which is that all environmental data that is collected by ISA contractors is public. And we make it publicly available through a database that we call Deep Data. It's online. Anybody can access it. I think the latest statistics I saw was that we had something like 2.8 million hits on that database. So certainly some scientists somewhere are using it.
Yeah.
And we have an enormous amount of data. We require contractors, for example, on exploration cruises to collect more than 100 different environmental variables, from seafloor composition to water column chemistry, oceanographic observations, and so on. So there is a wealth of data out there. It is these data are going to be fundamental to proceeding to the next step, because any contractor or industry that wants to apply for exploitation rights will certainly have to provide an environmental impact assessment that has to be based on scientific data that is objective, and that would be evaluated also in a very objective way by a scientific process.
Excellent, thank you. I'm already beginning to get questions being submitted through our website. I'll turn to those in a second, but to the rest of our online audience, please, if you have a question, submit it through the webpage for this event. We'll be happy to give that to Michael in a second. Now, you mentioned earlier on that there has been a 2-year extension to the process that is now ending in 2025. How optimistic are you that we'll be able to come to a final agreement by that date?
Well, I think the Council is working very well. I personally wouldn't read too much into the fact that this is an extension. I think it's an ongoing international negotiation involving 169 countries, as well as a large sector of civil society. So these kind of discussions are always very difficult. And I always say that it's better to give time to this kind of discussion, because at the end we'll end up with a regime that is very, very secure and very stable, because it will have the consensus. We're a consensus-driven organization. Actually, we've always made decisions by consensus, and we get there in the end. And the great advantage of that is that you have a system that is not subject to sudden change overnight. It's that level playing field where everybody knows the rules, everybody observes the same rules. There is no competitive advantage to any group, and there's no disadvantage to any group. And I think that's very important. And as far as my observation is that the Council is really working in good faith and is committed. Of course, negotiations are difficult, especially involving so many different players and so many different interests, but it is taking place in a way that is very constructive, very detailed, and I'm rather optimistic that we will get there.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, of course, all of these conversations are taking place at a time of quite intense international competition over issues of supply chains, critical minerals, energy transition, as well as what I would describe as a state of heightened tension with regards to environmental concerns, not just to do with climate change, but to do with all kinds of ecosystems. And that, of course, has been a highly complicating factors. But there's also the added dimension that, of course, the United States is not a member of the International Seabed Authority. It has observer status, am I correct in saying that? But is not a member of the Council. To what degree does that make it a less complete process or a less complete body? And how can we overcome the absence of the United States in this process?
Yeah, it's a good question, and maybe I should declare an interest from the start because I'm a strong supporter of U.S. ratification of the Law of the Sea Convention, and I hope that would happen at some day, but I also understand that it's a very complex domestic political situation. The U.S., as you say, is an observer, and as an observer, the U.S. has always played a very constructive role in the work of ISA. The U.S. sends a delegation to all our meetings, and the U.S. has been participating fully in the negotiation of the mining code, both by making text-based submissions and by making interventions in the Council. And I think one of the things that characterizes the debate that we are having in the Council is the very high level of transparency, because even though it is technically taking place in the Council took a decision from the beginning to open out discussions on the regulations to all members of the authority that are not members of the Council, but also to observer states and observer non-governmental observers as well. So it's a highly transparent process, probably one of the most transparent processes in the UN system, because many processes in the UN itself in New York are nowhere near as open. So in that sense, the US is playing a very active and important role. I'm very encouraged by that. Of course, under the convention, one of the compromises achieved by the US was to get a guaranteed permanent seat on the ISA Council. And of course that would be very, very nice in the long term, but that is tied up in issues of ratification and so on, which is a different issue. But for the time being, on the regulations, the US is playing a quiet but active role. It would obviously any more involvement is very welcome from my side, certainly. And of course, it is also open to US-based non-governmental organizations or indeed industry organizations to apply for observer status in the authority and to take an active role if they wish to do so.
Now, just to be clear, let's say we come to a final agreement in 2025. Would the United States be able to participate in a permitting process to apply for permits to explore?
Well, unless the U.S. is a state party, the U.S. would not be able to sponsor an application for exploitation rights. Perhaps U.S. industry could participate through arrangements with other states, but that would depend on those arrangements. But the U.S. could not be a sponsoring state without becoming party to the convention. So yes, that is an impediment.
That, of course, is in international waters outside of its economic exclusion zone.
Yes, yeah.
Understood. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, and that's worth noting, actually, because we shouldn't forget that there are marine minerals very widely distributed throughout the oceans, and many marine minerals occur on continental shelves.
Yes.
And that is a national process, a national decision as to whether to permit exploitation of those minerals, and that will proceed regardless of what the International Seabed Authority does. However, having said that, the regulations adopted by the International Seabed Authority, once they are adopted, become the global benchmark for what is the best standard and best practice. So if you want to ensure a consistent global approach across national boundaries, we need to get those regulations in place.
It's worth stopping for a moment on that, isn't it? Because throughout the mining industry, for example, both the industry and the environmental organizations who are active in that area call for global standards. They call for global minimum standards, and this is exactly what the ISA is doing, is actually establishing benchmark regulations that will apply not just to the international waters, but to economic exclusion zones throughout the world.
Exactly, precisely, and those would be the best and highest global standards, and the standards developed with the full participation of all countries and the scientific community from all countries.
I'm going to turn to one of the questions that's come in from the audience, Michael, and that is, how will the International Seabed Authority create a structure in the mining code to guarantee a just and equal sharing of the mining profits among developing nations, especially Pacific islands, some of which are sponsoring states? Yep. And this comes down to the question of equity.
Yep.
And I know that you mentioned earlier on that this has been one of the issues that has been not necessarily a sticking point, but has been sort of generating a more prolonged process.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a really great question, and again, one of the key features of the convention is that it gives equal rights to developed and developing states, and actually landlocked states, which is really fascinating, that landlocked states have exactly the same right as any coastal state to access deep-sea resources if they wish to do so. But the particular question is a great question. What the convention requires is an equitable regime for sharing of benefits. And we've been doing a lot of work around that in the authority, particularly through the Finance Committee of the authority, which is the key body that is required to look at this. We've developed an equitable sharing model based on rigorous economic and philosophical principles that is actually available on our website. I could talk all day about it, but the best thing is to go to the website and have a look at it, have a look at the economic theory behind it, because it's all there, fully referenced. And there is now actually active discussion around how you could envisage turning that distribution model into something that, for shorthand, you could call a sovereign wealth fund for the ocean. So taking all those royalties, those benefits, and reinvesting that in the ocean, in sustainability, and even other global public goods that are particularly benefiting developing countries. So really looking at this as a model of sustainable development.
And to build on that, I mean, there's the issue of capacity building, technology transfer, innovation, which I'd like to talk a little bit more about in a second. But is that an explicit part of the conversation right now, that we will take some of the monies that are generated, and to invest it in human capital in particular, in this case, we've got a question about the Pacific Islands, but I guess throughout the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Pacific Islands are one particular group, and sorry I didn't come back to that. But one of the super interesting things about the convention and the system is that it specifically recognizes different groups and different vulnerabilities. So small island states certainly are a particular group that needs to be considered, but also landlocked developing countries, least developed countries, and we work very closely with all those groups. And to answer your question directly, certainly this is part of the discussion, an explicit part of the discussion, that part of these monies can be allocated to capacity development in marine science and so on. And to an extent, we're already doing that, even in the exploration phase. One of the mandatory requirements in the exploration phase is that contractors must give training to individuals from developing countries, and I don't have the exact numbers at the top of my head, but we have trained hundreds of scientists from developing countries through the contractor training program and other capacity development initiatives, making deep sea science accessible to the whole world, not just in the hands of a few of the rich and developed countries that have the institutional capacity for deep sea science, but spreading those benefits much more widely.
I want to turn to the questions that I mentioned earlier on about technology, innovation, and how far the industry has come over the past 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
In some ways, the basic science of it remains the same because, well, particularly in the case of polymetallic nodules, it's about how do you harvest these very resource-rich minerals from the ocean floor in such a way as you minimize your environmental degradation and you maximize the economic efficiency at the same time. But we're dealing with levels of scientific sophistication now that are very similar to sort of space exploration in some ways. Mm-hmm. For many years I've worked in the energy sector, looking at deep sea oil exploration and production, and the levels of technological development there are extraordinary. The environment is extraordinarily harsh. Could you talk to us a little bit about that and what you're seeing taking place there? And I'm not asking you to sort of tell us the wonders of the industry, just to see how rapidly the industry or the science has advanced over this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there have been tremendous advances. I think there's been a revolution in marine technology over the past, say, 25 years. ROV technology, remote vehicle technology, for example, AUV technology has developed to the point where our contractors are now mapping the seabed at 5,000 meters to a resolution of less than 1 meter, which is remarkable over very large areas. And actually, as an institution, we are working with our contractors to contribute those data to global seafloor mapping initiatives. There's a project called Seabed 2030, and we make all that data freely available. Things like environmental DNA techniques to identify species, living species in the deep sea have developed massively, where our contractors are also using artificial intelligence. For example, instead of lowering a camera to take 1 or 2 pictures at the bottom of the sea, you can do photo transects using AUVs and collect millions of pictures. So the real problem is handling all these data is actually becoming more of a problem than actually collecting the data themselves, because it's just the sheer quantity of material that we can gather and the fine-scale data that we can generate. So this has been remarkable, and several contractors are now at the stage of testing components of potential harvesting equipment, whether collectors at the seafloor or the risers that are needed to move it to the surface. Contractors are looking at using different forms of energy, for example, to reduce the energy consumption of the whole process. So there's a lot happening. I mean, it's a very, very active space, and I think it's rather like the oil and gas industry in a certain way that the only thing you can guarantee is that in 5 years' time, everything will be done differently and better and more efficiently and with less impact on the environment. And I think everybody involved is very concerned to make sure that the environmental impact is the lowest that it possibly can be.
And now that we've made the comparison with the oil and gas industry, let me ask you this question, which is that the scale of the resource that is there in the oceans, in the context of the demands of the energy transition in which we're currently engaged, this is what makes it such a compelling business. This is what makes it such a compelling question about the regulatory framework and the fact that these are resources that are shared by all of the world's nations, including those who are landlocked, as you say. So when we look at that and we see how the global economy is shifting from a hydrocarbons-based energy system towards one based on renewable energy and therefore needing these critical minerals, that is what's driving both the interest in this process and also presumably some of the conflicts and controversies that we're seeing there as well. Could you talk to us just a little bit before we close about the scale of what we are presented with on the seafloor?
Well, the objective numbers are that the seafloor contains more copper, cobalt, nickel, and manganese than all land-based reserves put together. And those are not just my numbers. That comes from verifiable and objective USGS numbers. So the scale is enormous. Now, of course, all of those are not available in commercial quantities. Just as with any terrestrial mine, there are limited resources that are available in economically recoverable quantities. So you need to look for those and identify those first. But the scale of demand that will be needed to meet the requirements of the energy transition is likewise enormous and also objectively quantifiable from institutions like the IEA, their World Energy Outlook, all agree that we need many times more the amount of minerals than we produce at the moment. So in that sense, the seabed offers a viable and very attractive alternative, and it is certainly something to be thrown into the mix. And I think what is also very important is to look at global mineral demand and supply in a very holistic way. There is a tendency to just consider the seabed by itself. There's a tendency just to consider land-based mining by itself. But I think we need to take a holistic view and look at the entire supply chain, the entire environmental impact across the whole picture, and make rational decisions based on the objective statistics that we have available.
I'm going to squeeze in one last question, Michael, before I let you go, and that is to do with, we've talked about the absence of the United States from the regime, but of course China is a member.
Yep.
And China, which currently dominates so many of the critical mineral supply chains on which the energy transition, and particularly here in the United States, depends. China is very active in developing seabed mining technology, seabed mining projects, etc. How do you see that the Chinese have actually built up their industry over the past few years? And I know that as a member country of the ISA, you work for them as well in a way. So in an entirely neutral way, what do you see happening in terms of the Chinese participation in this industry?
Well, as I say, China is a major player within the International Seabed Authority, and primarily because the US is not there, that China ends up being the largest financial contributor to the authority and is obviously one of our very important partners. And we have a very good relationship with China at all sorts of levels, at the scientific level, and Chinese scientists work very closely with the ISA and make a very important contribution. China also holds 5 exploration contracts with ISA, and has developed rapidly over the past 20 years. I personally have seen the Chinese engagement increase tremendously, the pace of their exploration work increased, their technology developed rapidly, their scientific capacity has developed exponentially. So I would certainly say China is at the forefront of these developments and at the forefront of this industry.
Michael Lodge, Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, thank you very much for being with us here at the Wilson Center. To our online audience, thank you for joining us. Please stay on the lookout for more programming on critical minerals, on the oceans, on environment and environmental security here at the Wilson Center. And for now, thank you very much and good afternoon.